What do you think of the 2020s so far? Story 1. Character motivations seem all over the map. No real hero/anti-hero to root for. Very hard to identify with any of the main characters. Seems to be a retread of a tired, almost 100-year-old story, and the pacing is very inconsistent, getting whiplash from all the back and forth. Also, the second act reversal was terrible. Story 2. Feels like we are repeating history just with more futuristic technology. It feels like America and maybe even the rest of the world is in its second Gilded Age, or roaring 20s with massive wealth income inequality exasperated by corrupt politicians, racism, and culture wars dividing people. This was commonplace in the late 19th century. Unfortunately, in order to get to much better equality, it will likely take another economic collapse like a Great Depression II, electric boogaloo to get the world to a better place. The 2030s don't look promising for that reason either. Story 3. A bunch of terrible news globally, but personally, even after contracting COVID and feeling like death, it was the best thing to ever happen to me. As an autistic human, WFH has increased my quality of life by 100,000%. I'm so grateful, but also sad that it took a global pandemic to allow me to not dread waking up every morning. Story 4. On one hand, we're living through what is essentially the collapse of the country. On the other, effects from the Biden administration produced an economy that allowed me to almost triple my salary from 2018, allowed me to buy 2 houses, juiced my 401k assets, made it financially possible for my in-laws to have 2 beautiful children who I love, put my brother to work on big-time upgrades to our hometown in a construction job, helped my mom and stepdad secure a long-term housing and retirement agreement that is honestly keeping them afloat right now, revealed what a genuine bag of my sperm donor is, and has freed me from talking to him ever again. Story 5. FK this dumbest timeline BS. I want to wake up now. It's 2015. I have a decent job. I don't. A wife and kids I love. DJT has never been the president. There was still bad going on in the world. Charlie Hebdo, Trayvon Martin, European refugee crisis, ISIS, etc. But it felt more manageable. It didn't feel like the U.S. was on the verge of collapsing into a fascist idiocracy, or like we'd been on the verge of WW3 for the last half-decade straight. For the record, I still have my lovely wife and a pair of lovable, if obstreperous teenagers, and the same job. But wage growth is not keeping pace with inflation and healthcare costs, and God only knows how the next couple of years are going to go down. Story 6. Time stopped in 2020. COVID, agoraphobia, political unrest and anxieties, witnessing endless suffering, staring into another 4 years of Trump, I blinked, and my mid-20s were gone. It truly feels like the world stopped turning when I was 25 at the start of this decade. Now I'm turning 30. I've made no progress on my education. I'm essentially still mentally in that weird in-between high school graduate and proper adult headspace. Now I know what my mom meant when she told me you never really feel like an adult. Story 7. Reading these comments makes me feel I'm the only one that's been enjoying it and appreciating even the smallest of things. Yes, some wild things happen, but they always have happened one way or another. Life and humanity are still great and filled with love, but most people put their focus on only the negative aspects of it. Edit, typo. Story 8. Let's see. The decade started with a global pandemic that killed millions. What might be worse is that it also broke the brains of millions who did their own research and now believe vaccines and science are bad. Biden was a bright spot in many ways, getting landmark bills passed to help build up the U.S. infrastructure, as well as an unprecedented recovery in terms of job growth. Then we have in Ukraine and the spread of disinformation by internet tough guy Elon Musk, who pretends he's a free speech absolutist unless you say something he disagrees with. Now, America re-elected Trump, a man so unfit to lead, it's actually scary. You would think his mismanagement of COVID, plus the election denial, would kill his chances. But as I said, COVID appears to have broken the brains of millions, and the disinformation spread made people think he cared about their struggles and high prices. But the reality is, he's an idiot who played brinksmanship with America's closest allies and blinked, getting very little concessions to stop a trade that would have seen consumer prices skyrocket. All in all, this has been a show. Story 9. I can't tell what's actually shitty and scary versus me just getting older and understanding the world better. I graduated high school in 2020, so the pandemic started right as I was entering the real world. IDK, what to think? Were the 2010s awesome because it was pre-COVID and things were better? Or was I just an oblivious child-teenager? Story 10. It almost feels like 2019 was a time of innocence, the end of an era. Cost of living was still good, groceries were affordable, the prices of cars were good. You could still buy a house for a decent amount. People weren't living on edge and in constant doom and gloom. 2020 hit. We all thought it would be the same old fun year. We were very wrong. It honestly feels like such a blur, like, where did the last 5 years go? It almost feels like we were robbed out of some of those years of isolating, masking, not seeing family, so on and so forth, of what was now socially acceptable. Frankly, it was doing more harm than good in most cases. Anyways, here we are in the middle of the 20s, and I have a feeling we're just scratching the surface. Story 11. The pandemic started off as a public health crisis and turned into an IQ test. The existence of millions of verifiable morons was confirmed when Donald Trump got reelected, despite his previous performance, despite his multiple crimes, and despite multiple groups lamenting their decision to vote for him every day now. And we've got the atrocious Russian invasion of Ukraine, which Ukraine is fighting alone, despite Russia internationalizing by bringing in tens of thousands of North Korean troops. Even on a good day, Russia will cheer every time it bombs a hospital, a school, or shopping mall, and its troops are known for executing prisoners of and raping men, women, and children alike. So what I think of the 2020s so far is that I'd like to be able to see a few years into the future, past Trump's soon-to-be catastrophic second term, and beyond the Ukraine conflict to see how it all plays out. Currently, it's a nightmare that we're stuck with and can't get out of, but when we do, will we find all is well, or will we wake up from one nightmare to find the house is burning down and a serial killer is in our room? Story 12. If it were a thrill ride, I'd give it a 10/10. However, it's not, and it here, 0/10. I really missed the late 80s and all of the 90s. Granted, I was a teenager then, but everything seemed so much more chill and like people were actually making it. Now it's an every person for themselves mentality, and it cost $100 just to leave the house. Story 13. Loving it. Was fortunate to have just transitioned from teaching into tech right before COVID hit, so I got to work from home and spend more time with my family and watch my kids grow up, crushing it in the market. Due to my good fortune, I am able to give back a lot more of my time and money to my community and those less fortunate, which is immensely gratifying. Story 14. No revival of Art Deco, no flappers, began with an outbreak that killed millions, police brutality and protests that further showed police brutality, one of the most corrupt governments America has ever seen, in Ukraine and Palestine, soaring prices of goods and housing, and more extreme weather as a result of climate change. It's not good, and we're only halfway through the decade. Here's hoping that the asteroid actually veers off track and obliterates us. We don't deserve this planet. Story 15. I'd rate it a 4/10 maybe. People in general have become unhinged because the last 5 years has been filled with nothing but craziness and bickering. We lost 2020 and 2021 to C-19 off the bat, so we only have 8 real years of this decade. My business has taken off since the pandemic hit, but I'm at the point where I'm not chasing money anymore. I have the ability to ensure my family is taken care of for a long time, and other than that and my health and friends, I really don't give ***T about anything else. Story 16. I wish I had my teenage years in the 90s. Growing up now is a shit show. The change COVID caused makes puberty look easy. I'm afraid that by the time I'm 18, the US is going to be involved in some sort of conflict, and I just can't do this anymore. All I can do is look back on my childhood and the times before when everything seemed so simple and wish I did what my mom told me and stopped growing up. Story 17. Adding to the sentiments already described above, I have trouble figuring out how they feel aesthetically. To me, the 2010s were characterized by romanticizing trends of the past. Hipsterdom borrowed from 1950s fashion, and then vaporwave became big, and that seemed to kickstart a trend of romanticizing the 80s and early 90s. Now, the late 90s and Y2K seem to be vogue with younger Gen Z folks, but I legit don't know. Maybe that's not even bad. Never liked trends anyways. Story 18. I turned 36 in 2000. It's been downhill ever since. I missed the 1970 S80 S90 IMO. We are at the dawn of a catastrophic global depression, including market instability, global wars, the rise of the oligarchs, hostile AI, and pandemics. The planet would be much better off without humanity at the helm. An extinction event like a massive meteor would allow Earth another chance at evolution. Maybe the octopuses will be the next apex species. Story 19. Lame as. Absolute dog shit of a decade. If it's not political bullshit being forced into my consciousness, it's slop that's masquerading as entertainment. I thought the 2010s were god-awful and the 2000s were better, but I would absolutely give literally anything to go back to 2010. Literally the only good thing to come out of the last decade, for me, is that I got into Gundam. I got to watch the new Star Wars movies with my mother, and I've learned more about dinosaurs via ARC, which I wish I pushed more for back when I was in school, so I could have had a thing to go towards when I was in college before flunking out. I would have absolutely loved to have been a paleontologist. It would have been awesome. Now I'm 30, about to be 31, and I can't afford to go back to college, and I don't even know where I would begin, and it's like I really fucked myself right out of high school. Also, I got into Fallout and Elder Scrolls, and now I've been having fun with that for the last few years. Everything else has been absolute dog shit, though. From 2015 onward, my life has been absolute dog shit, outside of certain things. Story 20. Watching the U.S. as a Canadian spectator has been incredible, absolutely stunning. I'm always telling my friends we are in the middle of a historical period right now. Children hundreds of years from now are going to learn about Trump in history class. As for personal stuff, I've had a real glow-up. I reignited a passion for mountain biking. I never stopped. I was just less enthusiastic about it for 10 years or so. I quit drinking. I bought a house. I started really excelling in my career, and I started getting really serious about investing. The 2020s have been outstanding for me so far. Story 21. I feel like there was some sort of unexplainable shift in 2020, putting aside the obvious pandemic, and things have kept going downhill from then. Moments of peace and happiness are so far and few between anymore. Feelings of sadness and emptiness have become feeling of perpetual fear, at least for me. Story 22. For society, pretty shitty overall. Massive pandemic, climate disasters, wars, very volatile political and economic situations around the globe. The 2020s have been pretty shitty. Personally, really great. I made a move in my job that nearly tripled my salary, bought my first home, and my first child was born happy and healthy. Hard to imagine a better 5 years in my life. The trouble is reconciling the two and trying not to let one steal happiness from the other. It's tough sometimes when there's so much ugliness around. Story 23. I hit adulthood in the 80s. The 2020s started off worse than any other decade since, and it really hasn't improved much since then. It's been pretty good for those who already had some money going into the decade, but everyone else is getting reamed. The best decade was the 90s. The 20s is the worst by an order of magnitude. Story 24. Started off pretty cool. I got into a new career field where I could work through the lockdowns and got to spend some much-needed time with my family. My youngest and I did not get along at all until we had to share space for a while and you to know each other better. Every year since has been more money and more stress. It feels like everyone is more mean than they used to be. Bitterness everywhere. I also spend an entirely unhealthy amount of time on my phone these days. 2020s started off great for me, but have gotten worse every year. Story 25. 2020s in my sphere of influence has been pretty okay. My family and friends were predominantly homeschool communities, so our lives changed very little other than outside co-ops, sports, and lessons were canceled. We sold our house when our last child went off to college and bought a little property at the beach. Now we travel more than ever. I choose joy. In my sphere of influence, we are healthy and have the necessities we need. Story 26. Just like every other decade I've been alive, I've personally had many wonderful ups and downs while chaos hurls the world forward. The lifestyle changes necessitated by the pandemic, for example, have left me with the best work-life balance I've ever had, with my family thriving. I'm forever thankful for how things have changed for the better beyond my imagination. Yet I'd never sign up for another pandemic. Such is life, I reckon. Story 27. It's pretty average compared to the rest of human history so far. People love to shout doom and gloom, but we are healthier and safer than we have ever been before. Sure, we work a lot more than our ancestors and arguably aren't as happy, but for the most part, things are fine. The 90s was one of the best decades in human history, in my opinion. It was a period where we hadn't quite realized the peril we were in yet. We were much more flush with cash. We were in relatively good health, and we didn't have social media dominating our lives. Story 28. Getting to experience the 1920s and 1930s is not quite the dream I had. Since 80% of people love to make fun of the Germans for the Nazi thing, they can experience the growth of fascism in their countries and see how feckless most people are in fighting it and why we have been ruled by an elite class for thousands of years. Story 29. Absolute shite. Here in the U.S., I'm watching the fall of a once great nation. The same generation that literally threw bags at our soldiers returning from the politicians they voted in, forced them into, is once again desperately trying to hand our nation over to a racist, dim-witted con man that continues his generation's tradition of treating our military personnel and veterans like they're not even worth they used to throw at them. Poor Canadians. We're now that crazy neighbor that tries to build fences on their property without permission and then sues for injuring themselves with a nail gun while on their land. Story 30, I'm an old guy, and I being one of those old people that says things were better in my day and the world is worse, but it really does seem like everything is worse. Young people seem to have zero shot anymore, burdened with debt before your feet hit the ground into a world that is insanely expensive in every way. And everywhere I look, it feels like the bad guys won. It feels so demoralizing. Story 31, not a fan. I mean, we are right on trajectory for a complete repeat of the 1920s, though. Pandemic, check. With the dismantling of DEI, something similar to Jim Crow is right around the corner. Abortion will be the new prohibition, and finally we will end it in a depression that will be every bit as bad, if not worse, because at least then people work together and there were bread lines. Doubt we will have that this time around. Story 32, 2020 was really a turning point in my life, and not in a good way. I have given up on things getting better. Just have to deal with this new reality. I turned 30 at the very end of 2019, and I had this existential dread about my 20s ending. Everyone said I was worried about nothing, but looking back, I called it. It's been more bad luck every day. Story 33. Well, broke a leg, lived through pandemic and job loss, lost several friends, went no contact with family, survived a freaking hurricane in the mountains. My dad has cancer, and now I'm watching the government fall apart through the eyes of a historian. So, had better chunks of my life. Chunks. Story 34. That there's some truth to the conspiracy theory that when they kicked on the LHC, it vaulted us into a slightly altered timeline, and now we're here. Either that or we're all in a game of Civ. And right about turn 2004, the middle schooler playing got bored and started turning on cheats. Story 35. I know it feels like a show, and at some point I do agree with that. But let's look at all the great advancements we made since 2020. AI advancements transforming industries, research, and creativity. The James Webb Space Telescope providing unprecedented space exploration data. Fusion energy breakthroughs bringing clean, limitless power closer to reality. Major progress in quantum computing with real-world applications emerging. Significant improvements in battery technology for longer-lasting, sustainable energy storage. Expansion of lab-grown meat and alternative proteins reducing reliance on factory farming. Global reforestation and ocean cleanup projects gaining momentum. Advancements in CRISPR gene editing leading to potential cures for genetic diseases. Increase in remote work and digital nomad culture improving work-life balance. Growth of decentralized finance, DeFi, providing financial inclusion worldwide. Ocean exploration advancements discovering new species in deep-sea ecosystems. Increase in mental health awareness and support reducing stigma globally. Breakthroughs in personalized medicine improving treatment precision. The rise of circular economy initiatives reducing waste and pollution. New antibiotics developed to combat antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Major investments in green hydrogen as a clean energy source. Global commitment to reducing plastic waste with bans and alternatives. Progress in nuclear waste recycling, making nuclear energy safer. Expansion of high-speed internet access in underserved regions. Advancements in prosthetics and bionics improving mobility and quality of life. So yes, the news shows us all the crap we are in, but stay positive, it's not all bad. Story 36. It's going to be looked back as a time of great transition. Because of technological advances, the current form of business and governance no longer serves the people effectively. We've been headed down this path for the last 20 years at least. The current political climate was inevitable, and as a result of this ineffectiveness, whatever emerges from this turmoil will likely be something that can sustain us for the next 50 years. Story 37. Obviously started out awful with the pandemic. Then for me personally, it really got bad after my car accident in 22. Then my memory of being molested that I didn't know I had came back to me, and I almost got evicted on Christmas Eve in 23. However, this year has been promising. Moved to a bigger place, and I feel less financially stressed. I just hope the second half of the decade is better than the first. Story 38. As far as I can tell, everything changed in 2001. That marked a shift towards cynicism in our country, after the happy and prosperous period of the 80s and especially the 90s. Then the Great Recession on 2008, which for those who don't know, was a terrible time for millennials to enter the workforce. Then the onslaught of school shootings just sprinkled in the extra bad vibes until we got Trump in 2016. Then the pandemic and Trump 2.0, while combating inflation in the last 5 years. Not to mention that all the while, social media/smartphones have absolutely transformed our society. As a result, we are less physically connected. We spend 10, 12 hours a day glued to screens, etc. We are just so fucked. Feel bad for my generation. Story 39. The 2020s is the decade where everyone's stupidity and decades of pent-up events erupt into one massive global chaos. If I could just spend at least one peaceful day in the December of 2019, sipping chalky milk with marshmallows while playing the newly released Season 1 of Apex Legends, I would, Story 40. In a word, I turned 40 in 2021 during the pandemic and was only allowed to celebrate it under the rule of 6, which, whilst it was nice to be around some people, it hurt that I couldn't be with others. Also being disabled, therefore clinically vulnerable, I had to stay indoors for the majority of the time, which didn't help my mood when having to spend every day for 2 years waking up to the same 4 walls with little face-to-face interactions, previous sentence notwithstanding, and having to find ways to entertain myself with very little to watch on TV. Ironically, since having come out of lockdown and isolation, I found myself yearning for the solitude it gave us. Being around people has become an exhausting endeavor to the point that when I am out, I look forward to being back indoors and being on my own. Story 41. I had been of the belief that it was going okay. We were emerging from a pandemic, and the U.S. government was being managed by a competent president after years of turmoil in the late 2010s during the Trump administration. Then my country decided to do the dumbest thing ever and re-elect him even though we all saw his term was a disaster. And now over just these 2 weeks, we're seeing how disastrous a decision that was. Story 42. I'm detached in all reality. I keep up with headlines, almost shrug my shoulders at this point, like, yeah, okay. I donate where I can and locally try to make a difference at Boys and Girls Club. I don't know what more I can do. And it sucks to say, but I can't give much more. That won't change. Hasn't changed. I haven't voted because I don't think JT matters at this point. Just try to do my best to help my community. Story 43. Well, I graduated college, got my first car, spent the first 2 years post-college at a small business and watched it take off from a startup into a local staple, moved into an apartment with 2 of my best friends, started working a job that really sparked my career path in a field I'm legitimately interested in working in, and I'm currently in a relationship with a girl I know I'm going to marry one day. I am also tens of thousands in debt, pretty overweight, stressed to all hell. I lost my grandma last year. Also almost recently lost my little brother. The pandemic also robbed me of my senior rugby season in college, so that's something that'll probably be in the back of my mind for the rest of my life. So yeah, pretty good overall. Better than the 2010s at least. Like any sort of time, you need to take the good with the bad. Nothing is purely good or purely bad. The 2020s are no exception. Story 44. The 2020s feel like a rushed buggy sequel to the 2010s with worse mechanics, constant crisis events, and a serious tone shift. The pandemic tutorial overstayed its welcome, social features got nerfed, and every update just adds more grind and microtransactions. Definitely not as fun as the OG 2000s, or even the flawed but playable 2010s. Story 45-2030 won't get any better. Climate change acceleration will ruin shores with hurricanes, expand deserts in the south, spread more diseases, and the climate refugee crisis will push all political positions around the world further right-wing. You should probably plan to move if you're in an area that's high risk of impact before you're one of those refugees. Story 46. In my opinion, I think the 2020s have been a time of uncertainty. After all, it started with a pandemic where people faced a lockdown almost worldwide, and most folks weren't sure when or if things would ever return to normal, or even if they would make it out alive after COVID. And things have been unstable in terms of both economy and politics the past few years too. Story 47. For my whole life, I have been calm and tend not to worry about the state of the world. I'm rational. No point panicking if you can't control things. And I wouldn't say I'm panicking, but I am dreading the way things are going. And I think basically every country seems like a bad place to live. So I can't even have the fantasy of running away somewhere else. But hey, I am not single anymore. So good has come from this decade. Story 48. Not saying that I want to kill myself, though I definitely have at times, but I'm so tired of all this. I don't have depression. I'm quite mentally healthy. The shittiness I feel isn't from within. Instead, the entire state of everything is making me so miserable. Story 49. I have a fantastic family and live in a time of unprecedented technological advancement that makes my life easier. The world has always been a show. Nothing new there, just that we are tuned into it 24/7 if we chose to be. You can still be a good proactive citizen without being entrenched in chaos all of the time. Find meaning and fulfillment and be active in your community. Just turn the 24/7 news feed off. Answer: honestly, this is such a refreshing take on this decade. I think we pay so much attention to what's going on in the world that we're not focusing on ourselves. Even if certain incidents rub anyone the wrong way, it's best to take action instead of just venting just for the sake of it. Answer: okay, but surely even you have to admit that this era on some level is unique to American history. I mean, how can we just ignore the huge issue of school shootings? Cutting off my newsfeed is not going to wash away the blood of innocent children or lessen the heartbreak of all the families that endured tragedies of school shootings. No, school shootings are a systemic problem in our society, and our indifference toward these shootings, as displayed in your comment, is nothing short of disgusting. This issue should be one of the most important objectives for legislatures. Saying that things have always been a shit show will never justify the shooting of your children, or my children, or anyone's children. And you aren't worried about income inequality. To me, that's a huge societal issue that, if unchecked, could cause huge problems for our nation several years down the road. It is unsustainable. You can already see how that divide plays out in our politics and society at large. The level of corruption in our government is also an issue that any good American should worry about. Do you not find it unsettling that the richest man in the world with numerous conflicts of interest holds an unelected governmental position tasked with the loosely defined objective of spurring government efficiency? I mean, is that? I applaud your level of head-turning, but our current situation is no joke. Let's not lull ourselves into a false sense of security. History repeats, man. Things can and will happen again. We are not immune to the worst events of human history. While things may be cushy for me and you at the moment, there's no future promise of our comfort. Remember that, man. Answer: how do you devise indifference from my comment? Be active, be vocal, and take care of yourself so you can take care of others. Leaning into the 24/7 news cycle designed to keep you in turmoil and indecision by way of chaos and fear is no help to anyone. Being informed to the beauty of the world does not negate the tragedy requiring action and presence. Participate in your community. Nowhere in my comment does it state to turn a blind eye. And no, we are not in an unprecedented level of corruption and violence. We are just acutely aware in real time of the level that has always been there in many corners of the world and our own backyard. Slavery, corruption, genocide are the backbones of America. This isn't a short race. You have to protect your mental health for the long haul, or you become complacent out of exhaustion and fear. So get involved and turn the news off of 24/7. Check in with your community and find the joy and love that fuels you to keep fighting. Story 50. The same way some people felt about 2016 is the same way I feel about every 2020s. Have experienced some outstanding moments, yet it's been mostly low points personally. And mentally, the 2020s have been the worst. Can't say the same for others, but I can't say any year of the 2020s was good. Story 51. I swear growing up in the 90s every year felt better than the last, and it always seemed like the year 2000 was going to be the year where everything just fell into place and the world would start its journey towards utopia. But instead, everything just kind of stagnated, then things felt like they were going backwards as every year felt worse than the one before. I don't know why or what happened, but somewhere we fucked up. Answer: I do feel where things fucked up, and maybe it'll self-correct, but it will take a long time, is the ask for forgiveness later on all things tech, rather than permission first. And it just permeates in so many areas: company actions, social media interaction, Trump politics, etc. It has just led to a cesspool for human society to marinate and fertilize in, and we get what we see now with the huge amount of trolling online that has led to real-life behavior of trolling. With existing laws, the trolling gets massive amounts of more protection that the actual punch in the face of the troll, which we used to call punching a bully or Nazi, and it was considered good decorum. Now, OMG, maybe things will correct with this libertarian dream approach to tech adoption. But I do miss the 90s quite a lot. Answer: I think we made the mistake of believing technological advancement would always be accompanied by social advancement. In some ways it was. Gay marriage, anti-racism efforts, social justice, and so on all went mainstream. The internet helped a lot of isolated individuals connect with and empower one another. But in other ways, we backpedaled, and we are going through something like a conservative resurgence. I think there are two primary reasons: alienation due to technological advancement, a crisis of meaning and loss of community, loss of trust in traditional institutions, from gov to international orders to religion. Economic stagnation due to many factors, from income inequality to shifting manufacturing bases, leaving many no better off than their parents' generation. Answer: 2000 stagnated till 9/11s and the rollback began. Then false hope and change 08 combined crony too big to fail capitalism market crash, momentum picking up speed here. 2016 is when the decline became overt and visibly apparent. 2020 acute and palpable, where we all genuinely lost something. And this latest 2024 shock doctrine into 2025, ushering in unfettered mask-off oligarchy. Smoke 'em while you got 'em, folks, BC. The exit sign is flashing brighter and brighter as we collectively hold our breaths for the break in the bend. BC, goddamn, is it bending? And it's anyone's guess when it'll break between now and 2028, but my money is on it breaking before the next GE blush during. Story 52. Crazy that it started with a global pandemic people now look back on fondly. Answer. On the one hand, there were freezer truck morgues parked outside all the hospitals. Oligarchs were shook because we were on the verge of proving all this consumption is killing us, buying we don't need, making just to buy, making everyone who works on a computer come to an office to support a real estate investment. Pollution from all this. Healthcare is a human right. Science is objective and truth matters. Cars and planes are real bad for the environment, McKay. We are not so different from people around the world. Our planet's on fire, and we can and should do something about it. Cops shouldn't kill black people. Slavery was bad, and enslavers were bad, etc. So they fostered privilege and faux outrage about shelter-at-home orders. Callous, selfish people bitched loudly about their rights to leave home and spend money. Media is owned by the capitalists, so it broadcast a homogenized message. Protests of 20 people demanding to get haircuts got covered like the OJ chase. A vaccine was developed in record time. I got to watch a humongous scientific breakthrough in my lifetime. But it was necessary because millions of people were dying around me and everyone was at risk. The capitalists received government loans with favorable terms to help assuage lost revenue, so workers could still get paid. Yet, the capitalists cut hours because the books didn't balance in their favor. The capitalists stopped paying because the books didn't balance in their favor. Answer. I started off 2020 with a mental breakdown, but had a terrific time when the lockdown hit. Unironically, started to go out on weekends instead, or playing games all weekend and spent a lot of time with my friends at a friend's place. Had super good food and just had a lot of fun with them. It also cut my commute by a whole 4 hours a day and saved me so brutally much money. I started to actually have a life. What is a dark moment in your country's history that nobody in the country really knows about? Story 53. Individually, few, if any, states in the U.S. talk about their own role in the genocide of local indigenous groups. It's very vaguely taught at a national level, and certainly never using the word genocide, usually more focused on the Trail by of Tears incident before moving on to something else. I know almost nobody who could name a single thing that happened to them in my home state, and there's a lot to choose from. Acknowledging what the U.S. did to Native Americans is an extremely touchy subject. Story 54. Battle of Blair Mountain, Logan W. Fee, largest labor uprising in U.S. history, and ended when the U.S. Army intervened by orders of the president. Led by Mother Jones, coal miner uprising fought the coal companies and Sherry's deputies for the right to unionize. The miners weren't even paid money. They were paid in scrip that could only be spent in company stores. Story 55. That during World War II, when the U.S. was overseas fighting against the Nazis, we had our own Japanese-American citizens in detainment camps and had seized all of their property. Yet we still allowed the young Japanese-American men who were being detained to get out of the camps if they agreed to serve in our military. So, were they really a threat to the U.S. or not? After that was over and people were released from the camps, families were compensated 10% of what their seized property was worth. When I talked about this to my students, they said, "So, we were fighting Hitler, but we were just like him." Story 56. New Zealand's colonial history has dark moments in abundance, but one I think stands out for how well it summarizes the Crown's mistreatment is Parihaka. Maori, dispossessed of their land, gathered and settled an area in Taranaki, founding a town they called Parihaka. They wanted to live in peace, working the land that the treaty entitled them ownership of. The NZ government, who still considered themselves members of the British Empire without any particular allegiance to a distinct NZ identity that might include Maori, grew ever more hungry for land and ransacked the town. The Maori responded non-violently, but this non-violence was manufactured into a form of protest that the Crown was obligated to violently quash. The Maori were scattered or arrested, the land seized, multiple women raped. Story 57. The good old US of A has a lot of them. They're fairly widely known on more liberal-leaning parts of the internet nowadays, but absolutely not taught in American history classes, which, at least when I was in school, were more about instilling a sense of patriotism in students than accurately teaching history or learning from our past mistakes, with a few concessions made to at least touch on things like the genocide of Native Americans and the widespread use of slavery, long after most other nations had abolished it. The Tuskegee experiment, the Battle of Blair Mountain, the Wall Street Putsch, COINTELPRO, Project MK-Ultra, the intentional near extinction of the buffalo, the use of white phosphorus in the Iraq, the CIA's involvement in overthrowing numerous socialist democracies in favor of pro-capitalism dictatorships, enough to really undermine the notion of America as the land of the free. Story 58. The extermination of the Beothuk people of Newfoundland, due to pressure from European fishers, trappers, and settlers, smallpox, tuberculosis, and other European diseases, and later, armed conflict. The people, or perhaps their precursor nation, were first documented by Leif Erikson's expedition as living in northern Newfoundland around 1000 AD. There may have been as many as 3,000 Beothuk when European occupation of their lands began in earnest in the late 1700s. In the face of superior arms and numbers, they kept retreating inland to more and more marginal territory, but it was to no avail. The last known Beothuk died in 1829. Story 59. The Cambodian Genocide. You could have been killed just for wearing glasses, therefore being an intellectual. At least this was the Khmer Rouge logic. The prisoners were tortured so badly that they tried to commit suicide in every possible way, even by using some spoons. The executions used to be like this. The prisoners were put on a straight line, and to the second prisoner was given an object like a shovel or a hammer, which he had to use to kill the prisoner in front of him. Then, the same object was given to the third prisoners, and the cycle would repeat until there was nobody alive except for the last prisoner on the line, who was then killed by the guards. Since many medics were killed or sent to work as farmers, the local regime used child medics to conduct experiments on the prisoners. They used teenagers with no knowledge of Western medicine to experiment on people without anesthesia. For example, they opened one person's chest just to see his heart beating. Imho, this is even worse than Unit 731. Story 60. In Spain, we have some relatively well-known ones like the Inquisition, 1936 coup, and dictatorship. But there is almost no discussion of Spain's massive role in the slave trade. Most people act like Spain wasn't a part of it, and the conquest of America was some kind of historical achievement. Almost nothing negative is mentioned about slavery or the exploration of the Americas in school textbooks. Another runner-up is the narrative of our modelic democratic transition when we moved from dictatorship to democracy in the late 1970s, early 1980s. Fact is that there were a number of pro-fascist organizations that killed a bunch of students, labor leaders, and lawyers, and sometimes just random people. The Basque separatist group ETA was also killing and kidnapping people. Perhaps worse of all, the democratic transition granted amnesty to the people responsible for the repression and violence during the dictatorship and imposed a sort of forced silence on the victims. To this day, many of them still haven't been able to recover the remains of loved ones killed by the Franco regime. Spain has thousands of mass graves throughout the country, and we lack a reckoning about this period. There hasn't ever been a truth commission, an accurate historical narrative about this period, and many people still repeat Francois' propaganda when they talk about the dictatorship coup and the democratic period just before it, the Second Republic. Story 61. Every country has moments in its history that are often overlooked or buried, and acknowledging them is crucial for growth and healing. For example, in Insert Country, one dark moment that many people aren't fully aware of is, describe a historical event or period that fits the context. It's easy to forget or gloss over such moments, but understanding them can help us reckon with the past and prevent similar injustices from happening again. It's not about assigning blame, but about learning, so we can move forward as a more united and conscious society. Story 62. One of the darkest moments in the Democratic Republic of Congo's history that is often overlooked or downplayed is the atrocities committed under King Leopold II's rule, 1885-1908, during the period when the Congo Free State was his personal colony. Leopold II of Belgium exploited Congo's vast resources, particularly rubber, through a brutal forced labor system. Villages were required to meet rubber quotas, and those who failed faced extreme punishment. One of the most infamous practices was the chopping off of hands. If workers did not meet quotas, soldiers from the Force Publique would chop their hands off as proof they had been punished or executed. Millions of Congolese were subjected to torture, starvation, and massacres. Women and children were raped too. Historians estimate that 10 million Congolese, roughly half the population, died due to forced labor, executions, disease, and famine caused by Leopold's exploitative policies. Leopold never faced real consequences. He was just forced to cede control of Congo to Belgium in 1908, and his crimes were largely whitewashed. To this day, Belgium has struggled to fully acknowledge the extent of Leopold's crimes, and many Congolese feel that the lasting impact of this era, like his economic underdevelopment and political instability, has never been properly addressed. Story 63. The removal of natives in USA and destruction of natives in the Americas in general. It's not that people don't know about it, it's that most don't appreciate the size and scale of it and its lingering effects. We generally learn there was many skirmishes among very small nomadic tribes with early colonists, and many times they were on both sides of fights. In reality, there was more people in the Americas than Europe. Some cities were absolutely huge. There is evidence there were tribes here for over 15,000 years. Subsequently, the collapse was absolutely massive. You had whole cities and civilizations collapsing, leaving just small tribes as remnants. Similar story for the USA. What may have been just a few tribes at the time were remnants of great societies that had collapsed to the various pressures of disease and colonialism. Thus, today we think we know the Native American tribes and the various issues they face, but really what happened to all the others? Well, that's where the Latinos are from. What I like to say is Latinos are not brown-skinned because they are from Spain. Most have ancient lost lineages to these civilizations. Some other countries have other terms for this in recognition of the effects of colonization, but certainly not in the USA. And of course, this gets extra complicated in the USA with immigration. How can you ever know if you're telling someone they can't be in the land of their former people? No one can. Story 64. One dark moment in Philippine history that not many are aware of is the Balintang Channel Massacre during World II. In 1945, as Japanese forces were retreating, Filipino guerrillas and their American allies captured Japanese soldiers. In a tragic turn, many of these prisoners were executed by Filipino forces, not in a battle, but in cold blood. This incident isn't widely discussed, partly due to the chaos of and the complex emotions surrounding the brutality of wartime decisions. It's a reminder that history often holds uncomfortable truths, and we should acknowledge them to move forward as a nation. Story 65. I don't hear a lot of people talking about the Wilmington coup, the only successful coup in the USA. In 1898, a group of white supremacists, led by a former Confederate colonel, burned down black-owned businesses, gunned down black citizens, and overthrew the integrated government. The new government instituted Jim Crow policies.